Welcome to Teachers Transition Podcast, a show dedicated to supporting teachers transition in, through, and out of education. Grab your seat and let's talk about how to make your next transition a successful one. Happy Thursday, everyone. This is Alex from Teachers Transition Podcast. We typically record on a Sunday, but I have an exclusive guest that has a super busy schedule, so she was able to pencil me in on this wonderful Thursday evening. And I'm so proud and honored to have my beloved wife, Keyla Kirton. And she is everything to me. She is my best friend. She is my business partner. She's just a person that has a lot of great insight for teachers. Working in higher K-12 as well as on the HR side. And I would like to give her opportunity to say hello to our wonderful guest of Teachers Transition Podcast. Good evening, Keyla.
Good evening, Alex. Thank you for the warm welcome.
And thank you for joining us. Again, if this is your first time tuning in, we're in season number 2, and we just had 500 streams. So we're very excited on the impact of this podcast. But if you're tuning in for the first time, Teachers Transition Podcast is a podcast for those teachers or that are looking to get into the profession, those that are in the profession that may want to transition up, or they might be stuck in a little rut, or in some cases, they might be looking to transition out to another career field. So today we're going to kind of dive in from the HR perspective, and which is, I think, a pretty unique vantage point or lens. So, Keyla, you began your academic journey in English and journalism, even producing for 60 Minutes. What's first sparked your interest in storytelling, and how has that foundation shaped your leadership today?
Well, that is a great question. I think I was very obsessed with the news cycle as a little girl, even. I can recall begging my parents to buy me the Sunday Times, the New York Times on Sunday. I became familiar with some of the writers and the anchors on the different channels and their style. And just that world captivated me. I also attended a middle school that had a radio and television program. And so it was a New York City middle school, Ditmas Junior High School. And there, I was able to produce my own television show called Teen to Teen. And so, where we had conversations about real situations at our middle school with some of my fellow classmates, and that was part of a grade. So I think just all of those components together, being exposed to the radio and TV program in at Ditmas, as well as just an interest in reading, and especially reading the newspaper, I think was what ignited that interest.
Okay, very exciting. And from there, can you kind of take us a little further into your transitions and into things that you loved and you had an interest?
Absolutely, yeah. So from there, I went to, in high school, I was part of the newspaper, and continued that interest into my bachelor's degree. So I majored in English with an emphasis in journalism.
Yeah.
I think with the hopes of working in news, maybe as an anchor woman or as a reporter. Anything along those lines. And so my first job, as you mentioned, my first internship was with 60 Minutes too, as a producer. And so one of the exciting things that we, got to do with our crew was we were one of the first crews on the air train for JFK. So when New York City debuted that air train for the first time, we were there to go along for that first ride along with the mayor and some of the different elected officials and for Queens. And so it was quite an important story that they entrusted us to do, even as interns. So it was pretty special. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. I think the transition from journalism to recruitment and HR was more, geographical. I moved out to Long Island. We got married. Um, and then from there, there weren't lots of opportunities in journalism. So I started, working in recruitment
Okay.
with temp position. So it was a temp agency at the time.
Mhm.
And then from there, I moved over to Farmingdale State College, where I was hired as a recruiter and eventually as a coordinator slash assistant dean of recruitment research and development. And I think that was where I really had the opportunity to see how folks are hired, how teams work, learn leadership, be mentored by phenomenal leaders across the board from, Dr. Keene, who's the president, Dr. Veronica Henry, um, Dr. Karen Coutrier, Brian Marr, may he rest in peace. So many great leaders and mentors that I had an opportunity to work under. And I think that was really my first exposure to
Okay.
leadership and to not journalism, but to HR.
Okay. Speaking of transitions, every teacher has to go. I mean, whether you're a teacher, you're a human being, you have to navigate through transitions. And, many teachers struggle with identity when considering a transition. What was your defining moment when you realized your career path was expanding beyond the traditional roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think um, at Farmingdale was a big defining moment. I think until that point, I was still entertaining an idea of staying or going back to journalism. Um, I had started a radio show even at the time at a local radio station in Long Island in Suffolk County. And so I was still hoping to go back to that world. But I had a conversation with Dr. Veronica Henry,
Okay.
who is a distinguished professor, dean of Farmingdale State College. And she was asking me about, what was I working on and my master's and what were my plans. And I had I mentioned to her that I was thinking about going to seminary and getting a master's of
Hmm.
divinity. And she said, you really need a master's to be to serve at your church? That seems like overkill. You're already very involved at church. She encouraged me to consider something in leadership or even HR.
Okay.
She saw some things in me that she thought I could really cultivate in a program in a
Yes.
different discipline. And so I think, just her insight and her guidance, saying, hey, you don't really need a master's to do church, right? But you might need one to do something at a higher level, whether that's here at the college or
Mhm.
elsewhere. And so I would say she called out some things that I hadn't really seen in myself.
Okay.
And so, I think that really helped open the possibilities for me and think outside of the box instead of
Yes.
pining for, going back to journalism.
Okay. And would you consider that an internal shift that helped navigate you through your external shift?
Okay. I would consider my conversation with Dr. Henry an external shift.
Okay.
I think the internal shift for me um, was, I think mourning this aspiration of, going back to journalism and really having closure about that. I think, I would imagine for some of your listeners, they when they started teaching, right? Maybe they had specific ideas or goals or aspirations of what they wanted to accomplish as an educator or maybe become an administrator. And I think, sometimes in being content with where you are and finding joy with what you have, and
Hmm.
also acknowledging the misses and the things that you didn't get to do, I think really readies you to be open to the next adventure and to the
Okay.
next opportunity and to even think about it, because even thinking about something new sometimes is intimidating. But I would say having closure with your expectations and
Yeah.
aspirations is really helpful in readying yourself to be open to the next.
Okay, well, speaking of the next, we know that reading your biography and me knowing your story, that you made a big leap over time from higher ed to working in HR. And can you talk about that transition? And then of course to what you're doing now. What was that like?
Oh my gosh, it was so different. So from higher education, it's a very slower pace. Things take a long time, and then you're working with tenured employees. So there's a particular mindset with that. They are entitled, and rightfully so, right? They are tenured. They have worked hard for that distinction. And so change takes time. And this is the Northeast. So we're talking about unions, and it was just a lot of red tape for just to have a conversation. And by the time I left the state college, I was supervising tenured faculty,
Okay.
as well as support staff. And so that was quite a learning experience that I got used to. And the transition, we moved to Texas, and I, had an opportunity to lead the non-instructional HR function of Dallas ISD,
Okay.
which was a great opportunity. I don't think at the time I realized how important of a role that was. And Dallas is such a storied district, and it's such a large district. And there's so much going on. But I will tell you, from higher education to K-12, there's a thread that was consistent.
Hmm.
And I think that thread was the care and the love and the passion for students.
Yes.
And I was infected. I was infected. I think in higher education, I can recall one of my colleagues, Mrs. Canton, may she rest in peace. She would always say, students vote with their feet, you
Mm.
know. And so they vote with their feet. What does that mean? That,
What does that
students,
mean?
yeah. Students go to the classes and they register for programs that serve them,
Okay.
that serve them. And so, if you're doing something right in K-12 or in a GD program, which the EOC Educational Opportunity Center, which we provided, the students will come back and they will
Okay.
tell their
Got
friends, and the program will grow.
it.
So they vote
Okay.
with their feet.
Gotcha.
Um, and so there was such a pride in creating a program that students felt was important and valuable. And
Hmm.
so it wasn't about my personal agenda for my program. And at the time I was directing the financial literacy grants and programs, and it wasn't about what I thought students needed to know. It was about what they really needed. And how I knew I was doing a good job is that the students were happy and they came back.
Mm.
um, and so, and that was the same in K-12 in Dallas. I cannot tell you how at least once or twice a day, even though we were all non-instructional staff, so I oversaw 14,000 FTEs
Wow.
of non-instructional, so that's all of the maintenance folks, the food and services, the bonds office, and I can tell you at least twice a day,
Yeah.
yeah, we we had a conversation um, about the students.
Okay.
And what, from the textbook director, it was all about the students. What can we do for the students? To, the maintenance directors, what's going on? What can we do for okay, this bathroom's not working. We need additional FTEs because we have to get the school ready for the students. And so that really was intoxicating and
Okay.
contagious. And
Okay.
I think that helped me with the transition from K-12, from higher education to K-12, because it was always student centered and people lived and breathed that. And I have to say, I know there's all kinds of stories about Dallas ISD, and good and not so good, but I just would love to take the opportunity to say, please know that the professionals in the district at
Hmm.
all the levels, and especially in the administration, care about your kids. They care
Yeah.
about the kids. They care about the teachers. And our goal was always teacher centered and student centered.
Yeah, and I will say, as a person that has briefly worked for Dallas ISD, they were one of the first to have uh, incentive pay so that
Yeah,
teachers were not stuck. They had an opportunity. A teacher could, with some work and
yeah,
getting test scores up, teachers
yeah.
could, get to the pay that they
That's right.
deserve. So,
That's
shout out to Dallas ISD.
absolutely.
So taking big steps, teachers, we have to take big steps at times, whether it's, transitioning in, whether it's switching districts, whether it's switching positions, whether it's becoming an administrator or director or pivoting it out. Can you share your journey from working at an HR in the Inforce software space to now working for the vendor to now working for a partner to now being the CEO of a amazing empire. Can you talk about that journey and what fears you had to confront?
Oof, that's a whole lot. So, you know, HR is a practice that you really can get very comfortable in. The
Mhm.
day to day is it's always something new, it's very exciting, but there's a lot of instability, right? And there's a lot of uncertainty. And if there's a different leadership, a different, you know, if leadership changes, then the approach, the perspective, and how we practice HR
Yes.
changes. And so sometimes it's a package deal. So if you're with a particular administration, when those changes happen, then they bring in their own HR leaders. And so I have experienced that. Gratefully, I've never been terminated from a role. But it's just been it was a very fast paced kind of transition
Okay.
from HR. I will tell you that when I was in my HR roles, in all of them, I had always been told by the consultants, like, "Hey, you should really consider, doing consulting. You're being wasted. You're wasting your talents here. As an HR lady, Kayla, you'd be really good at consulting and implementing these HR systems, and you're just so good." Kind of like explaining things and that kind of thing. So they thought that I would be really good in implementing. And so when I had a role that was reduced, so I was on severance pay and I was in transition, and sometimes those transitions are rough, right? Because it's a blessing financially that you've got some carryover to hold you over for a good while, but at the same time it's just a lot of time to think. And so one of the things that I thought about, I think we took a trip to LA that summer.
Yes.
We did a family trip to LA and probably a couple of other trips. And on one of those trips, I remembered those voices from those consultants who were like, "Hey, you should consider, consulting, and you might be really good." And so I went ahead and applied for the company. Infor, and I applied for Infor. It was a really challenging application process and
Okay.
very different from what I've experienced. I think in HR, it's just a different world. The interview process is thorough, and
Mhm.
sometimes not. I've been in roles where like my hospital role, where I don't think I filled out an application. They they just called me.
Come on in.
Come on in. Here's your office. What
You
you
see
like
you in
these
the ER
colors?
waiting room. Can you move up?
I know. And so it was different. And so this was kind of sort of it was thorough, but it wasn't. Some of the questions were I didn't think it was very specific to the job.
Yes.
And so I did all this prep. We prep for things. And so I was prepping, and the questions had nothing to do with the job. It was like, "Oh, what do you like to do for fun?" And, "Oh, we're kind of, this is how our team works." And it was just conversations with colleagues,
Yeah.
future colleagues. So I thought that was very different. And then, I was interviewing, I think, in June or July,
Okay.
but I wasn't starting until the end of August. And so that was another thing that I was just like, do I actually have a job? What is going on? And I will tell you that, going from supervising over, 14,000 FTEs and being at the division levels and all of that senior level in HR to working as an independent contributor, not supervising anyone, starting from scratch
Hmm.
was really tough,
Okay.
really tough. I think it challenged everything that it challenged my identity in a very serious way.
How so?
Um, well, first of all, with if you're transitioning to a company like Infor, or if you're going to go to Oracle, our competitor, uh, you know, SAP, if you're going to do that, they have a certification process because you have to be knowledgeable in the software and in the tool. And so that process challenged me because I will tell you guys, and honestly, I really used to think I was smart. Gone through my whole academic life
You are brilliant.
believing that I was an intelligent lady. And I appreciate that. Of course I am. Of course I still believe that. But not those
Ladies and
few
gentlemen,
first.
she's much smarter than I am, so.
No, no, sir. I don't know. And so, but that I was it challenged me so much because this certification process was tough. I had to rewire my brain. And I'll give you an example. There's one thing to learn the software. And I think a lot of us, when we're thinking about being introduced to technology,
Mhm.
we look at it from a user perspective, but we don't look at it from the logic of why certain buttons are where they are, why the flow of the process has to happen in a particular way,
Mhm.
where the data exists in the system,
Yes.
and why. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of those rationales are not intuitive.
Yeah.
And so if you're a person that, feels like, hey, well, it should be here because this should be the answer because this makes sense, sometimes it's not the way that something is coded. And
Yes.
so I had to kind of rewire my brain to think about, okay, how is this coded? And while I'm not a coder, I do not know how to code. I really had to learn the program, learn the system, learn global HR, which was my first certification, and understand how it works inside and out as much as possible. I will tell you that I failed the test a few times, and that was the part that hurt my little feelings and my confidence because I don't think, yeah, I had to think about when was the last time I failed a test.
Yeah.
And so it was just very humbling. And again, giving credit and honor where honor is due. Patty Erpenbach was my supervisor, and she's now, we love Patty. She's now retired, and Patty was like, Kayla, because she could feel the energy of
Yeah.
the frustration, and she said, I know you're bright. I don't want you to feel like you're proving anything to me.
Okay.
I know you can do this. And I want you to trust the process. And I want you to know that you're going to do this and you're going to be really good. But like, take your time. I
Yes.
know you expected to come in here and just blip, 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 blip. But she said, no, it's going to take time. And if you're a person that is an achiever, you want to get things done, you want to do the right thing, and you want to win, and you have that competitive edge about yourself, I think when you are transitioning, especially, if you're teaching going into tech, you have to allow some bandwidth for that grace,
Yes.
that you were a rock star over here, but over here it's a little different, and
Yes.
you got to give yourself some time to adjust, and to get the lay of the land and know that you'll pick it up. You'll make up for lost time. And I will tell you, with Patty's advice and some others, that is exactly what happened.
Yes. Yes. And I will point out to our audience, the only reason that there's a podcast is because this lady has encouraged me to get past what I feel my normal comfort zone is, but I'm realizing how much I enjoy this. So shout out to the CEO. Kayla Kirton. And speaking of getting past your comfort, your comfortability and
Hmm.
those skills, can you talk to those, teachers that are out there? What skills do teachers already possess that make them exceptional consultants or even project managers? Because a lot of teachers don't think they can do it. It sounds like a foreign term to them. So how can they see themselves transitioning if that's their goal to become that?
I am so glad you asked this question. I think one of the terms that I learned in the State University of New York is transferable skills. Um, so there are skills that we all have and we possess that whether you're doing it in the context of the classroom or even as a stay-at-home mom or dad, or if you're driving a truck or whatever it is you're doing, there are certain skills and there's a certain process and way of thinking that will help you and is transferable to any context. And I would say, as teachers, and most of the teachers that I know, including my husband, um, you guys are very, very organized, very organized. And so, and you understand how you learn,
Hmm.
which is so important to have a mastery of how you learn best, because especially one, you're learning a new skill, and two, because you're working with clients, you're teaching a new skill.
Yes.
And I think, Alex, I'd like to back up and kind of explain what consulting is and what
Sure.
it is that I do now. And so what we do is, let's say take a school district. They are changing systems from an older system to a new
It's
HR
I word.
system. We're not going to say that word. They're changing over to Infor because it's the best. And so you guys are going from like a manual process where you're hiring and you're using paper forms to like an online application process. You're going to online benefits processing where you get to pick your benefits every year and it's like rolled over, it's automatic. You're going through an online process for like, reporting incidents if there's a slip and fall or if there's an incident kind of thing. So this entire enterprise resource planning tool, including financials, payroll, time, absences, the whole shebang, right? As a consultant, what we do is we work with a select team of folks. So on the project management side, you put together and you advise the client on who should be on the team and what is the timeline that it's actually going to take us to get this project completed. You mitigate issues. Sometimes there's staffing shortages. Sometimes people get sick. Sometimes the schedule is delayed for one reason or the other. And so the project managers have those discussions with the steering committee and the steering team.
Okay.
And then on the consulting side, you're working directly with those owners of those processes. So if I'm doing implementing the HR tool or the HR software, I'm not a coder, right? But because I speak HR,
Hmm.
I can talk to the HR managers, the HR leaders, and I coach them through, okay, guys, this is the part of the system where we have to enter the employees and let's upload the employees, right? And so we walk them through the process. And so even if you don't have an HR background, because you will be certified in the tool, you'll have exactly the knowledge that you need to be able to navigate the client through the system, to show them how it works, to document if there's changes or things that they don't like. You take down that documentation, you give it to the coders,
Hmm.
and they actually do that heavy lift with the coding. So
Gotcha.
really what you are is sort of like a translator. You speak to the client, you coach them through this big change because it's a transformational change for
Yeah.
the organization. But then on the other side of that, you also communicate and you understand the framework and you understand the templates that we need to use so that you can communicate those changes back to the developers.
Okay.
All right. And so, with that being said, as a teacher, I think that the skills of listening first is really important. I think taking really good notes is really important. Early on, when I started consulting, the way they trained us is they would have us sit on calls with experienced consultants and take notes.
Hmm.
And at first, oh, I was like, I am a glorified secretary.
Yeah,
It's what I am. But you know what? That's how I learned.
yeah,
That's how I learned because I had to listen. And then it also helped me to hear how the best consultants were really good at listening.
yes,
They didn't talk as much, but they listened more. They asked questions. So when you're, having that first call with the client and they're telling you about their hiring process and they're telling you about, okay, we have these many steps. You don't just walk away as a consultant and go, okay, here's the build, here you go. You want to ask as many questions as possible so that you get it right. Hopefully, the first time. It never really happens, but
yeah,
you want to get it right. And I think clients, as consultants, you learn that clients want to be heard and they want to know that you did your homework and that you prepared and that you're listening and that you understand. And part of that is building that rapport with the client. And so I think for teachers, you'll find that an easy transition
yeah.
of slowing things down, listening, taking really good notes, and then going back and being able to prepare and present something that is well thought out for the client.
I mean, teachers do all that stuff every day. I mean,
Hmm.
working with students, differentiating instruction to, curtail the needs of a certain type of learner, and adapting curriculums and to students that have certain needs, certain So, it sounds like it is because I am in that space too. That it is something that is tangible and something that we already do. It's just kind of
Uh,
adapting a different mindset. You transfer, like you said, transferable skills. You transfer from the classroom to this is your client. Instead of a student, it's a corporation or a hospital. So thank you for breaking that down because it seems more tangible hearing it from you that hey, this is something that a teacher can do and is already doing.
yeah, and I also want to expand on that because I will say the only thing that's not going to be different going from teaching to consulting is not being able to go to the restroom.
What are
When
you
you
talking about?
because there are days that I will
That
sit
might
at
be
the
a deal
desk.
breaker because
I know you thought you were getting a break because you were working from home. I will tell you, there are days that we sit at the desk, and Alex can tell you he will leave at like 6 in the morning, come back at 4, 5, 6, 7, and
those
I'm still at the same desk, back to back to back calls and meetings and reports and deadlines. And so it is, some days are long,
yeah,
but they're really fulfilling. So I would say I don't think your bladder is going to get as much of a break as you imagined.
gotcha. So we can just get a catheter and just have it,
I think so. Yeah.
so So transitioning from briefly from this, we also understand from your biography that you volunteer as an ESL instructor and work with adult learners. What do you believe educators underestimate about their own transfer? Well, we kind of talked about that, but can you talk about your experience working with ESL learners because you didn't follow the typical education path of going to school to be educated, but you're a great educator, especially with ESL because they love you. So can you talk about that experience and utilizing those skills?
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm an English language learner myself,
Yeah,
so I am a native from Panama. Spanish is my first language, and so I was in ESL once upon a time. And so I think just with anything, it's about your passion. Um, you know, when I started volunteering, it was something that I did really just out of just wanting to teach. I wanted to share my time and my resources with people who could benefit. And so it was really sheer passion. I
yes,
did, I got some pointers from Mr. Curtin on prepping and different things and lesson planning. But I think other than that, as an English language learner, I
Mhm.
wanted them to be conversational and be confident in their conversational part. And so that's what I focused on. So just real life scenarios. I think for me, right, that would be a reverse transition, right, into a space that I'm not familiar or trained in.
Yes.
So I get what you're doing there. So I think for me, I was really driven by just a passion to be helpful and to be effective, and also depended a lot on my educator professionals. But it was a really great opportunity and a great time.
Awesome. 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 Well, digging into your academic past, your master's thesis focused on organizational commitment and employee health. How does the research connect to burnout in education today? Because that's a hot
Mm,
topic. Burnout, morale,
yeah,
health.
yeah. Thank you for asking that question. Um, you know, the research that I conducted, and this was over 10 years ago, um, it kind of showed that organizational commitment and employee health
Hmm.
are internally driven.
Sure.
I think at the time, there was a hot conversation about employee incentives
Yeah.
and employee pay, right? And the impact of employee pay.
Hmm.
I think at the time it was a little early in the Google
Yes.
model of like having ping pong tables in the office and, video games and sushi. And that's
Hmm.
what breeds employee commitment
Yes. Yes.
and positive mental health for your employees, right? But my research said the opposite. It said, hey, it's not these external factors and it's not this wonderful work environment. Not that we don't need that, we do need that. But it's not just that, right? It is something that you are internally predisposed
Mm.
to be resilient
Okay.
when you're dealing with some challenges. And so, if we're talking about teachers, and this is just from my observation and just my experience from the HR side, I think that a big part of the challenges that I've seen with a lot of my teacher friends um, is not feeling like you have options and not feeling like you have ownership of your career path. I
Yes.
think sometimes teaching can feel like, okay, this is a terminal degree or a terminal job, and there aren't a lot of career ladders.
Mhm.
Um, except for being a teacher. And so I think we live in a day and age that is changing. In particular for us at Curtin Consulting Group, we are part of our goals and our pillars and our values is we want to help teachers transition into consulting. We want to get teachers certified and we want to get them trained.
Yes.
And so I think, for a lot of teachers, you have the summer off, you've got a lot of time off. I would invite you and challenge you to use that time to just map out and design the career that you want to have.
Yes.
Take that control back because I think a lot of us are trained to do that in other fields, especially in HR. We're trained to, think about your career. Do you want to be in your HR practice as an employee relations person? Do you want to manage risk? Do you want to lead teams? Do you want to do team coaching, executive coaching? So there's so many different avenues that we can explore. And I don't see that same conversation for teachers.
Yes.
And so I'm so happy for this podcast. I think this is a start. But truly, I would say, Alex, that for teachers, take that power back and dream up your ideal career. Dream about things that you want to accomplish and start working to it. It doesn't have to be like you rip off a band-aid.
Mm.
It might take you 3 or 4 summers to build your expertise, to get a certification, to establish your experience in a particular new field, or even to do both.
Yeah.
You may even, I think, with us with consulting, some of you may be able to do both. You may be able to work the summers and help us implement Odoo or help us implement Infor in the summers and then go back to work. So I think there's so much flexibility. There's a book a long time ago by Daniel Pink, where he talked about kind of how the world is moving towards contract work, that most of us are going to be contract workers. And he was talking about that maybe 10, 15 years ago. And so I think that, I would encourage you guys to really reframe how
Yes.
you view a career and how you view work, because there's so many opportunities for you to earn income. And we know this isn't about income only,
Yeah.
but certainly income helps. And so to earn income and to do it well and also do it in a fulfilling and challenging way.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good segue for us to end this first episode. I'm gonna ask you to come back because we have a whole nother set of questions we didn't get to, but definitely great conversation. And if our leaders or our teachers or anyone on that's listening would like to get in touch with you, how can they reach out to you?
Absolutely. I'm very responsive on LinkedIn, so you can reach me at Keyla Kirton on LinkedIn. Very happy to connect with you. I also do coaching, so if you are interested in having some conversations and talking through transitioning into especially Infor consulting, I'm really happy to connect either through us or connect you with anyone in my network on LinkedIn. If I can make an introduction, I'm very happy to do that.
Well, we appreciate your time and your wisdom. And if you're listening, stay tuned because we're going to bring her right back for a whole another set of great questions and conversations. So thank you, Kayla Curtin.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, love.
And thanks for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with a colleague. Keep learning, keep growing, and never stop believing in your impact because you truly make a difference.